The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this, what are we, Sunday night? First show post-Okan. So some recollections from Okan, and then we'll get into discussion of Sri-Lanka, a failed state, collapsing state, starvation, all kinds of other problems. We'll talk about that, the implications for the world, the causes of it. That's important. What we can learn from it, and of course, ramifications for other countries potentially in similar situations, although, as we will see, the circumstances in Sri Lanka are somewhat unique, but it does bode ill, I think, for many countries around the world, given the economic circumstances around the world. So we'll get to all of that. Let's see. Reminder quickly that we use the Super Chat on this show to raise money for the show, to keep it going. We have a daily goal of $650. Catherine Mendez is here today to kind of rally the troops and get you going so that we can get to the 650. Haven't done this in a while. The shows from Okan didn't really emphasize Super Chats, and so we didn't raise a lot of money on those, so we're behind. So 650 is a good starting point. Hopefully we can do better than that. I guess we'll see. We'll see how we go over here. James has already got us started with $20, and thank you, James, for doing that. All right, so as I said, we'll be talking about Sri Lanka in a few minutes. But first, quickly, I just got back from Okan. Okan was in Washington, D.C. this year. It is, as always, it was a great time to be had. You get, 400 plus objectivists in a hotel, and lots of conversations, lots of late night discussions, lots of socializing, parties, concerts. There were concerts. There was a performance, of scenes from The Fountainhead by Austen Shakespeare, which I thought was very powerful. There was the playing of a high-definition new copy of We the Living, the Italian movie, We the Living, which just is gorgeous and fantastic. There was kind of approved for distribution by Ayn Rand and edited by Ayn Rand in the 1960s, but it is a magnificent black and white movie from the 1940s. That was done without Ayn Rand's permission, but turned out to be probably the best movie of her books, the best movie representation from her books. So that was a lot of fun, and the guy who produced it and found the original movie and then redid it. Was there, and he told the whole story of discovering the print and how it had been made out of Mussolini, and how Mussolini was too stupid, I guess, to figure out that it was anti-authoritarian, and how ultimately the movie was killed by Hitler himself, by Goebbels and Hitler, who saw the movie in Germany. So even Hitler knew who Ayn Rand was. Who saw the movie in Germany, figured out that it wasn't just an anti-communist movie, that it was broader than that, and got the got the movie killed and destroyed, and with one copy surviving. So amazing story. One of these days, if you want, maybe we can talk about it here on the show. Maybe when the movie comes out, we'll have the movie maker, the guy. He didn't make the movie, but the guy who's producing the renewed version of the movie to come on the show, and maybe we can talk about it, because it is just an amazing story. Amazing story. But on top of that, of course, we had tons of lectures, some great lectures from Anka Agate and Harry Binswanger, of Peter Schwartz, and many others. I closed the conference off with my talk on optimism, which I will post on the Iran Book Show channel once it is released, so you'll have access to that. But yeah, a lot of good general session talks, a lot of good breakout sessions. I didn't attend as many talks as I would have liked to. You know, they always keep me busy at these conferences, meeting people, talking to people, fundraising, doing stuff like that. So, plus, you know, doing the show. I did the show twice from Okan, and everything else going on there. But yeah, great intellectual content, and yeah, great opportunity to just for a week be in an environment with people who are mostly like-minded, and that is, and with great intellectual content. It's hard to beat. It's hard to beat Okan. So I'm starting my push to get, I don't know, let's get, I don't know, 200-300 Okan listeners to Okan listeners, Iran Book Show listeners, maybe 500 Iran Book Show listeners to Okan. I think you'll have a blast. I think you'll enjoy tremendously. We can do like if we get enough, we can do maybe a little gathering of, or a big gathering, because I think there are a lot of you who come to Okan, and do something, if we plan it ahead of time, maybe do something as part of the program, do like a Iran Book Show gathering for everybody, just a social thing, which would be fun. So that is next year, over the July 4th weekend. I know for some of you that's not a great weekend, because you like to celebrate it with family, but yeah, Miami starts, I think, June 30th, ends July 5th, something like that, at a really nice hotel right on the water in Miami. So should be amazing. Those of you worried that it's too hot in Miami in July, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's too hot in Miami in July. But a plus side of that is you don't have to leave the hotel. So much going on. You won't have to leave the hotel. And if I remember right, the hotel is big enough, interesting enough that you really don't have to. Landon says it's 50% off right now. Is that true? Is it 50% for anybody who signs up? Or is it just for like attendees at this last Okan? But anyway, if you attended this Okan, you want to sign up for next one, now's the time to sign up, 50% off. But there's going to be discounts. They phase over time. So sign up early. And then if you let me know and we get a sense of how many people from the show are going, then, yeah, we can maybe talk to the Iron Institute about giving us an evening or something on the main floor and having a party somewhere, a Iran Book Show party, which and that will be a lot of fun. We can do super chats. I can sit on stage and you could throw dollars at me and ask questions. No pole dancing, though. All right, that was my attempt at humor. Let's see. We are going to talk about Sri Lanka. So I don't know if you guys are following the news and watching the news, but you know, this is, I think, making headlines everywhere. At least those news outlets that cover world affairs. Sri Lanka is basically, you know, in a state of collapse. Yesterday, on Saturday, the presidential palace and the office and home of the prime minister were all occupied by protesters. I think the home of the prime minister was set on fire. This is after months and months of demonstrations. This is after people all over. Okan discount expires tomorrow, Shazbot says. So sign up today. Is there like a link where people can sign up to do that? But yes, Okan discount expires tomorrow. Shazbot was at Okan. He was at, I think, both of my my shows from Okan, or just one of them. I can't remember, but that was great. All right. So anyway. Sri Lanka falling apart, as I said, demonstrations since March, food prices going up through the roof, not just inflation at above 30%, but inflation of food dramatically higher than 30%. And we'll get to why. But it's not just prices going up, massive shortages of food staples like rice. Sri Lanka, a huge rice producer, and there are shortages of rice. As I said, we will get to why that is in a few minutes. You've got fuel, people lining up long lines for months now to get gasoline to be able to drive. The country in June last month defaulted on some foreign debt. It says like $50 billion of foreign debt. About 15% of that is to China, but the rest is to Japan and to a lot of private investors, a lot of private bondholders. The country is decimated. It's worse than I think the Greek crisis was in 2011. Not in the sense of its maybe global implications. Greece is at the heart of Europe and part of the European Union, and it had implications for all of Europe, particularly for Germany. And on the upside for Greece, there was an obvious partner for a bailout, which was Germany and the rest of Europe. Here, who's going to bail these guys out? And it's much worse. There's literally starvation. I think I read somewhere 80 to 90% of Sri Lankans are skipping a meal, which I guess these days is considered healthy, skipping breakfast in particular. And so Sri Lanka is in free fall. The economy is in free fall. The president and the prime minister, given that their residencies are being occupied, have resigned. And so they're going to form some kind of unity government. That unity government is going to try to negotiate with the IMF to try to get a deal for bailout, but such a bailout will require massive changes and a dramatic reduction in standard of living, quality of life, I think for a long time in Sri Lanka as it pays off its debts and restructures its economy. So what happened? Just a few years ago, in 2018-19, Sri Lanka was considered one of the strongest economies in the world. I'd say pre-19, so maybe 16, 17, 18. It was growing at very high rates of growth. It was considered a middle to high income country. It had a GDP per capita, I think that's at least double that of India. It was an economy on the rise. It was being praised for its success. And we'll talk about why it had done so well, what had led to that. But today, 3 years later, it is basically a disaster, starvation and complete political collapse. What happened? So to understand kind of what's happened, I want to go back, give you a little bit of history. I know some of you at least like the history stuff. A little bit of history. It's modern history, so it's not, I don't know Sri Lankan history, so I only know kind of its modern history. But we have to go back to the late 1970s, early 1980s, and the launch of a terrorist campaign, a civil war, you could call it, within Sri Lanka that started. There are basically two main ethnic groups in Sri Lanka, the majority and then the Tamils. Both are variations, I think, of Buddhism. But the Tamils were a minority and felt and I assume this is true, that they were discriminated against and did not have opportunities and did not have any political say. And as a consequence, they launched, in a sense, a civil war and a terrorist campaign, maybe to try to establish independence, or at least to try to establish some say in the politics and the economic life of Sri Lanka. And I don't know why I'm saying Sri Lanka, it's really Sri Lanka, S-R-I, Sri Lanka. This war, which was quite devastating, and I've seen estimates in the tens of thousands of deaths as a consequence of this war, lasted 30 years, until 2009. In 2009, two brothers The president at the time, his name was Mahinda Rajapaksa, and I apologize if I am slaughtering the name Rajapaksa. Of course, Sri Lanka was a British colony by the name of Ceylon, Ceylon, and it changed its name when it gained its independence. Anyway, there was the president was Mahinda Rajapaksa, and his brother Gotabaya Rajapaksa was the defense secretary. They basically launched a brutal, unyielding campaign against the Tamils. They did what you need to do in order to destroy an insurgency. They did what you need to do in order to destroy terrorist activity. They were brutal, but they were incredibly efficient, and they basically brought the Tamils to their heels. In 2009, the Tamil Tigers basically were destroyed, capitulated, and the civil war was over. Both brothers became obviously heroes after stopping this 30-year war. I don't know if you know this, but I think it's the Tamil Tigers who really made, I don't know if they invented it in modern terms, but they certainly made popular in the modern world the idea of suicide bombers. So the Tamils were the first, I think, based on my readings, the first suicide bombers in modern annals of terrorism. The Muslims learned it from them. So 2009, Mahinda was president, his brother was defense secretary, and they became heroes. And indeed, from that point on, the Rajapaksa family came to dominate Sri Lanka politics. Mahinda served 2 terms as president. After he left the presidency, his brother, Gotabaya, became president, and indeed Gotabaya was president until yesterday when he resigned. In the meantime, Mahinda went from being president to being prime minister, so they controlled both of the key positions in the Sri Lanka government, and they controlled many of the other departments. They have 2 other brothers who were ministers in the government. One of them has a son who is another minister in the government. Basically, these guys controlled, right, the entire political structure in Sri Lanka. And it's quite evident that they participated in and were part of an incredibly corrupt regime where they got incredibly rich at the expense of the Sri Lankan people. They were treated as heroes because of the victory over the Tamils, and therefore were granted, I think, a wide berth in which they practiced their corruption. They also had wide control economically and so on. Anyway, from 2009 until really 2020, although the economy got into some trouble in 2019, but until 2020, the economy grew at significant rates, getting up to 6-7% growth. It was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Generally, income rose, standard of living rose, quality of life rose across the entire country to the benefit of its citizens. Now, 2 sources for this economic growth. One, peace. Peace is an important component of economic growth. Peace allows one to invest. It eliminates uncertainty. It provides for some, if not a lot, of foreign investment. So that was one. Second was a dramatic increase in commodity prices, commodities that, or really agricultural products that Sri Lanka was very good at producing and exporting. So we saw prices go up of rubber. If you remember, well, I don't know if you remember, maybe you know this, Ceylon, rubber was discovered in Brazil, in the Amazon. And during the 19th century, a lot of people, particularly German immigrants to Brazil, became very, very wealthy off of their rubber plantations in the Amazon. Indeed, Manaus, the city in the middle of the Amazon, was one of the richest cities in the world. It was one of the first cities in the world to electrify, provide electricity. It built a magnificent opera house, which still stands, a beautiful, magnificent European-style opera house that would invite opera companies into the heart of the Amazon to perform there. It was one of the richest places in the world because of the immense rubber plantations. During, I think it was World War II, maybe before, but certainly during World War II, the British sent a spy to Brazil, and basically they stole. I mean, I guess you could call it stealing. Basically, the Brazilians protected the rubber plant they didn't want to export the plant because they wanted to maintain kind of a monopoly over it. So the British stole the rubber plant and took it to the Far East, where it was planted in places like Malaysia, I think Indonesia, and Ceylon. Which the advantage of Ceylon is I think it was never occupied by the Japanese, and the British could continue to produce rubber in Ceylon. Of course, rubber required for jeeps, for cars, for military equipment, for running the war. So Ceylon became an important hub of rubber production in the world, and has exported a lot of rubber. But also the other thing that Ceylon, if you've traveled the world, you know that Ceylon tea is incredibly valuable. Tea, and we'll get back to tea later because tea plays an important role in this economic collapse. Tea is Ceylon tea is well regarded all over the world, and that was another major export from Sri Lanka. So tea and rubber were two, and those prices were going up during the early 2010s, and as a consequence, the Sri Lanka economy did well. In addition to that, there was some liberalization of the economy, and farming was particularly productive, and the economy was doing well. Sri Lankans are generally well educated. They have supposedly a fairly good health system. Life expectancy is longer than it is, for example, in India. Again, wealth is dramatically higher. So all of that was true, but then add to that a massive binge of debt. So the Sri Lankans borrowed money like crazy. They borrowed it from anybody who would give it to them, and they borrowed it and invested dramatically in infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, and ports. One of the reasons Sri Lanka is important and maybe is making the news more than you'd expect is, FYT says socialized healthcare and education. Yes, but some socialized healthcare systems are better, some are worse. Supposedly theirs is at the margin better in the same education system, maybe as an inheritance for the British, particularly the educational system probably as an inheritance from the British, is a well-functioning educational system. Again, healthcare and education not as good as it would be in a private market, but relative to other socialized countries, supposedly pretty good. Relative to other Asian countries, supposedly pretty good. So they went on a borrowing binge. Lots of money, paying for lots of government employees, paying for lots of subsidies to their favorite industries, their famous farmers. Lots of money flowing in. I mean, one of the beauties of infrastructure projects, construction projects, is they are rife for corruption. These are the kind of projects where politicians get suitcases full of cash to put on the side by different contractors who are bidding for projects. There are multiple ways in which you can benefit from these projects, and Sri Lanka was building all over the place. And I was getting to why it's strategically important. One of the main strategic, or not one of the main reason Sri Lanka is strategically important is that it sits a little south of India, southeast of India. And in that sense, it sits on the main shipping channel from Europe, Africa, to East Asia. Any ship leaving China or Japan or any of the Eastern Asian countries, Taiwan, South Korea, heading towards Europe, heading towards the Suez Canal and into Europe, has to pass via the waters or just off the coast of Ceylon, of Sri Lanka, not Ceylon, Sri Lanka. And of course, any ship traveling to Africa, although trade with Africa is not that great, has to pass through those waters. So this is a key strategic location, key strategic ports, and one reason why Sri Lanka became a part of the One Road Chinese initiative, and the Chinese lent quite a bit of money to the Sri Lankas. It's only about 15% of total debt, but quite a bit of money. And as part of that, China owns a massive port in Sri Lanka, which is part of this, back and forth of, which is part of this One Road, Silk Road, if you will, the Silk Road, the renewed Silk Road effort by the Chinese. So Sri Lanka is strategic. It's important. It invested hugely in infrastructure, and for a while, that was fine. But then, basically, I don't know, three things happened that started to alter the framework or alter the projection for Sri Lanka. First, well, before I say that, let me just say one more thing important. One of the major sources of foreign exchange for Sri Lanka, one of the major sources of revenue, one of the major sources of employment in Sri Lanka is tourism. Tourism is a major source of revenue in Sri Lanka. It's got beautiful beaches, amazing hotels. By the way, two of the largest sources of tourism for Sri Lanka, just as an aside, we'll get to this in a minute, are Ukraine and Russia, particularly Russia. So Russians used to love to go to Sri Lanka for vacation. It is, of course, warm, it's tropical, it's a beautiful place, and if you have a little bit of money, it is a great place to vacation, and probably not as expensive as many other places around the world. So tourism, a major factor in the Sri Lankan economy. And then two things happened that destroyed the tourist industry for Sri Lanka. One, in 2019, I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a massive terrorist attack in Sri Lanka. 230-something people were killed, were murdered by Islamists, suicide bombers. There is a small group of Islamists, of Muslims living in Sri Lanka, relatively small. It's called the Easter attack. Relatively small group, but had been radicalized quite a bit. With Saudi money, like everybody's radicalized, right? And some of those radical Islamists, I can't remember how many, suicide bombers, but they went in and they targeted the tourist industries. They targeted hotels. So as a consequence of the terrorist bombing, tourism plummeted in 2019. It was starting to recover towards the end of the year and into 2020 when COVID happened. And of course, COVID basically drove tourism to zero or close to zero in Sri Lanka, which devastated the Sri Lankan economy. So you have a major source of revenue, a major source of foreign exchange, a major source of livelihood for Sri Lankans, devastated by the coronavirus, by COVID, and by the restrictions on travel, And as a consequence, Sri Lanka was starting to get into trouble in terms of could it pay its debt? There was some talk about maybe Sri Lanka should default, but the Sri Lankans decided they would not, and they started prioritizing debt payments on their massive, I think, $50 billion of debt over imports and over, the things they needed. This, of course, created a massive decline in standard of living and quality of life, and problems in the Sri Lankan economy just accumulated and built and got worse. You could argue that, it has been argued, of course, that then with the Russia invasion of Ukraine, gas prices going through the roof, or food prices, particularly things like wheat going through the roof, that was kind of the tipping point that tipped it. Sri Lanka could not afford to import the gasoline. It imports all its gas. It imports a lot of food, things like wheat. It has a robust agriculture, but it's not the kind of country that produces wheat. It primarily produces rice and vegetables, and, as I said, tea and rubber. So you suddenly got a spike in prices, and all its foreign reserves were being spent on buying produce, buying gasoline, but mostly paying off its debt. Paying interest on its debt, not even paying off its debt, paying interest on the debt. All right, so all of this is happening, which is pretty devastating and pretty horrific to the economy, and declining quality of life, declining standard of living. Applejack, thank you, really appreciate it. And then last year, in April last year, they kind of topped this off with one of the dumbest policy decisions, in history. Just unbelievable, right? So this is what they do now. It depends on your interpretation, right? It depends on your interpretation why they did it. Two possible reasons I'll get to. But basically, in April last year, the president announced that they were banning the importation of chemical fertilizer into Sri Lanka. They were banning all chemical fertilizer. Now, just to be clear, 2/3 or more than 2/3 of the island's farmers, 80% of the island's farmers were using chemical fertilizers. 80 to 90% of its tea farmers and rubber farmers were using chemical fertilizers. And suddenly, overnight, it became illegal to use such fertilizers. Now, why? Well, you could argue there are two reasons. One, the public reason, the reason the president gave, and second, maybe a hidden reason. So the public reason was environment. Chemical fertilizers are bad for the environment. They pollute the rivers. And health. Chemical fertilizers make the food bad. This move was an attempt, according to the president, to convert Sri Lanka into the first country maybe in the world that is 100% organic. This was presented to the world, to Sri Lanka, as this massive attempt to make Sri Lanka healthier, cleaner, and of course, it also helps with climate change because fertilizer is, based on a chemical process that produces CO2. So, in a massive attempt to, in one day, to convert the entire country to organic farming, in one day. Now note that organic farming is hard, it's labor intensive. To actually do it at scale is super knowledge intensive. That knowledge did not exist among the farmers. Maybe some farmers, 10%, 20% of them. There was no organic fertilizer to replace the chemical fertilizer that the president could offer in its stead. And basically what happened is that the farming industry in Sri Lanka collapsed. A third of all agricultural land went unplanted in the summer of 2021. A third. Crop yields from the areas that were planted dropped by 40%. 40%. And there you get a food shortage. And there you become dependent on Ukraine, on Russia for grain. I mean, Sri Lanka should be an exporter of food. It is an exporter of food. It was exporting rice. Now it can't make enough rice for its own people. All in the name of organic farming. All in the name of environmentalism. And this was, you know, a big priority and a big pitch to the world. Sri Lanka presented itself as this virtuous country. It was hailed by places like the World Economic Forum, by, you know, Nobel Prize winner Joseph Stiglitz, as this is amazing. This is terrific. This is what the whole world should be doing. I mean, this is as stupid as Germany going off of nuclear power and switching to wind and solar very, very fast. But in some sense, this was faster and dumber. But all in the name of some kind of amazing, you know, virtue. They're going to become the world standard. This is more of the environmentalists' destruction of human life. Environmentalist destruction of living standards of life, because people don't have food. There's not enough food. All in the name of organic. Go organic. Now, organic agriculture, and I'll get to the other reason why the Sri Lanka government probably did this. We'll get to that in a minute. But at least they presented to the world as the reason for this was environmentalism, going green, health. Truly sad, though. But it's interesting, right? That one thing we know is that organic farming produces dramatically lower yields, as we saw in Sri Lanka, about 40% lower, even when it's done well. And in Sri Lanka, it was probably done not as well as it could have been. Right? So what you need is, in order to grow the same amount of food, you have to grow it in a much vaster area. So first, organic farming is lower yield. To grow the same amount of food, you have to, so-called, quote, destroy a whole section of the environment in order to plant more. Ultimately, it turns out that in terms of CO2, in terms of, you know, whatever you want to call it, in terms of the environmental stuff, organic farming is no more so-called clean than is chemical farming. Chemical farming is just unbelievably productive. It's much cheaper using chemical fertilizers, sorry. All right, another reason, another important reason why Sri Lanka switched to organic was that all of its chemical fertilizer were imported. And it was running out of money to buy stuff. So at least one reason, and maybe ultimately the dominant reason, why Sri Lanka dropped fertilizers was they couldn't afford to buy them anymore. And they couldn't afford to buy them anymore because they had bankrupted their own country. They had borrowed without thinking about tomorrow. They had built up a pyramid of debt, layering on top of layering it. They had created an economy that was built on corruption and on debt. Projects, infrastructure projects were built which had no ability to provide a return on investment. Sri Lanka was already a failed state, but this idea of going organic was the thing that tipped it into starvation. They stopped producing food. Now think about it. The two number one exports in Sri Lanka were tea and rubber. Exports in tea and rubber plummeted because they weren't producing enough. That made the foreign exchange problem worse because there was no income. And now how are they going to pay that debt? So as I said, in June, Sri Lanka defaulted on its first debt payment. It's going to have to restructure its debt. The IMF is involved. They'll have to restructure the economy. Quality of life, standard of living is going to drop precipitously. It's going to go through a bunch of economic crises and political crises. This is going to be ugly. And this is the consequence of a combination of irrational environmentalist policy with irrational borrowing of money. See, I want for a minute just to expand beyond Sri Lanka. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in Sri Lanka. It's a mess. It's a disaster. People are going to suffer. And I feel sorry for the people there. People are going to try to leave. I think you can expect a migration out. The question is, where do they go? Maybe as a British colony, they'll try to go to the UK. As a former British colony, they'll try to go to the UK. But you can expect a decade now of real problems in Sri Lanka and a horrific economy. Now, Sri Lanka has reversed the organic plan. They first eliminated the ban on importing chemical fertilizers for the tea and rubber industry. Then they did it across the entire spectrum for all of it. The problem, of course, is now they don't have the foreign currency to import the fertilizer, so now they're stuck where they could import the fertilizer, but they can't. It's legal to import a fertilizer, but they don't have the money to do it. On top of that, the government now, because of the outcry from the farmers, has committed $200 million to pay the farmers for losses due to the organic collapse, plus another $200 and something million of subsidies, food subsidies, which will only put Sri Lanka in more debt, which is only going to make the collapse even more painful. I mean, there's just no way out of this. This is a disaster. It's a disaster caused by the political class in Sri Lanka. It's a disaster caused by people who borrowed money with no regard for tomorrow, no regard for their own people, people who got rich off of the backs of their own people through basically bribery, fraud, corruption. So I feel sorry for the Sri Lankans. Unfortunately, this is probably not going to be the only country this is going to happen to. While I think this organic stupidity, irrationality, evil is unique with regard to Sri Lanka, I don't think other countries bought into this nonsense. But you're already seeing countries like Zambia. What was the other country? Other countries, I think in Africa, you'll see other countries like San Salvador in Central America, even though San Salvador is considered a libertarian because they went on Bitcoin, but San Salvador is in big trouble. And I don't think the Bitcoin collapse is helping them. And you'll see other Latin American countries, but certainly Zambia, are in Zimbabwe, which has been in trouble for a long time, but these countries are in massive debt. There's no easy way for them to get out of the debt. They have not put together the policies that would get them out of debt in a healthy way. They are all on the verge of bankruptcy. Other countries could join that list ultimately. Ultimately, Italy could be in trouble. Greece could be in trouble again, although Italy's probably in worse shape. Turkey goes in and out of trouble. Other countries have massive amounts of debt in Asia. Even China is not in good shape economically, particularly, given the consequences of COVID. And of course, the United States is not in good shape. We have massive amounts of debt, high inflation, not as high as Sri Lanka with 30%, but high inflation, and the world economy is in real trouble. This is, what we're seeing right now. By the way, one of the things that Sri Lankan government did when it couldn't raise debt anymore, right, when the debt was so high, is it started printing money. It started printing money like crazy, as governments like this do, because they're desperate and they have to pay their bills locally. They can't get any foreign exchange, but they can at least do it locally. And as a consequence of paying it, printing all that money, what happened? Well, inflation. So global economy is in deep trouble. Developing countries are in deep trouble. Countries that relied on debt to finance themselves are in deep trouble, partially because interest rates are so much higher, so the interest payments they're going to have to make in the future are so much higher. And the only way they can pay the debt is by refinancing it, which raises the interest rate constantly in an inflationary environment. But also because, given the bankruptcies, given the defaults of places like Sri Lanka, debt is going to become more expensive, particularly in developing countries. It's going to become more and more expensive. You're going to see the global economy probably not shrink, but grow dramatically less than expected. And you will see significant consequences. Significant consequences around the world. These things always start in little countries in the middle of nowhere that nobody pays attention to and nobody seems to care about, and those tend to be the canaries kind of in the coal mine. And then, given the debt burden, by the way, one of the big countries that is on the brink of default, we'll see if they actually default or not default, is Pakistan. Pakistan is a massive country. It is a country with a huge population, and it is a country that is economically, again, on the verge of default, together with all these other countries. So you're seeing significant decline, and of course, think about what's happening in Ukraine. Think about the Russian economy. Think about the money that's going to have to be spent to rebuild Ukraine and to ultimately to rebuild the Russian economy. Where's that money going to come from? The world economy is heading towards a very, very difficult decade. A very, very difficult decade. Again, with inflation, rising interest rates, recession, and defaults in the periphery. Remember that the people who lent money to these countries are people who live in relatively rich countries. This all hampers their wealth. It reduces the amount of wealth that they have. So this is bad news across the board. All right, that's the spiel about Sri Lanka. I thought you'd be interested. It's going on right now. Again, people in the streets, and the presidential palace and the prime minister's office were occupied. Prime minister and president have resigned, and Sri Lanka is in chaos. Last I heard, people were walking in and out of the presidential palace. The guards had given up trying to stop them. They were lounging inside. They were hanging out. Not sure how all that will end. Maybe with the military taking over, maybe with an interim government. We'll see. But it is an unpleasant situation. All right. So that is the spiel on Sri Lanka. Happy to take questions on that or on any other issues that came out of that that you have. We are on the Iran Book Show. We support the show by a variety of different means. One of them is monthly contributions on iranbookshow.com/support, Patreon or Subscribestar, or even locals. Those are the best ways to support the show, really. Primarily for those who do not listen live, those are ways in which you can support the show on a monthly basis. It's regular income. It's something I can plan for and know it's coming. And that makes it possible for me to devote the time that I devote to this activity rather than other activities. So far, this show has brought in enough income for me as one of the many things that I do to justify the time that I spend on it, but that, of course, depends on you guys. One other way in which we fund the show is through Super Chat. So Super Chat, we will start taking Super Chat questions now. Super Chat is where you support the show if you're watching live. You can't do it if you're not watching live. Although, those of you watching YouTube after the fact, you can support the show by applauding. There's an applaud button, and you can support the show that way. If you gain value from all the information I provide, if you gain value from like a show like today, everything that I've done, everything that I've done, everything that I've explained to you about Sri Lanka, if that's a value to you, then please show the value for value. So hopefully, I know a lot of you enjoy the history, the global politics. You don't get this anywhere else. You don't get the analysis, the research, the overview anywhere else. Where else are you going to learn about all the different ways in which statism has statism and the effect of statism in causing these kind of collapses. All right. If you want to ask a question, I know a lot of you would like to ask a question. The way to ask it is using the Super Chat. I don't read the chat for the questions. The Super Chat, you can do $2, you can do $99, you can do $499. I don't think you can do over $500. But you can do anything up to $500 in the Super Chat or $500 in any other currency. And we've already got a few questions. But we're pretty behind on raising $650. So we've got $420 to go. That's a lot of $20 questions. So hopefully there are a few of you out there with $50, $100 questions that would like to get this going. Don't disappoint Catherine. I don't think Catherine has failed to raise, I don't think she's failed to raise $650 in a show since the beginning of June, maybe since the middle of May, something like that. So pretty cool. I think you can do more than 500 a day. That's right. That is the limit. All right. Let's see. All right. TY asked, I'm just taking this because it's first one. The more money you put in the question, the priority it gets. But since this is about Sri Lanka, I will take it. What should be the initial measures instituted to fix system in Sri Lanka? That's a great question. I would say the first thing you should do, one other aspect to the economic collapse, which is interesting, right? They lower taxes. Lowering taxes is not good policy when you're taking on massive amounts of debt, when you've got a problem paying off that debt. A government needs revenue. Yeah, we all would like a world in which taxes are very, very, very low. But as long as government has a payroll, as long as government expenses exceed revenues, it needs taxes in order to function. It cut taxes dramatically in 2019. And as a consequence, created massive deficits that had to be paid through more and more and more and more foreign debt. And that debt just killed it. So first thing you have to do is liberalize the economy. And it's easy. You take away all constraints on import and export. You lower tariffs to zero. You eliminate any export barriers that might exist. Then you eliminate any barriers to starting a business, any barriers to entrepreneurship. I don't know how much of the land in Sri Lanka is private, but you give you basically allow the farmers to own all the land that they cultivate. Maybe that already exists, but if it doesn't, you do that. So on a massive scale, you deregulate the economy. That's the first thing you have to do. You add to that a dramatic shrinkage of government programs. You eliminate subsidies, which is a big problem in Sri Lanka. They subsidize everything. So you eliminate subsidies. And you start laying off on a massive scale. government employees. Now, this will cause massive unemployment, at least initially, because the subsidies will require restructuring the economy. Laying off huge numbers of government employees will cause the economy to have to restructure. And as you know, you'd have to have entrepreneurial activity. So really, 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 really crucial is you have to make it easy to start businesses. You have to eliminate all barriers to starting businesses. So I wouldn't raise taxes in this kind of environment. But what I would do is I would shrink spending to get to a surplus. And if that requires raising taxes a little bit for the short run, then that's what you would have to do. But shrink spending as much as possible, while at the same time deregulating, eliminating the tariffs, eliminating trade barriers, all trade barriers on everything. All trade taxes on everything. So you'd have to replace the tariffs as a tax with other taxes. But you want to make it cheap to import stuff, food, for example. So that is what I would do, and that's what needs to be done. You know, some of that will be done because the IMF will cause them to shrink government spending. They'll have to lay off people. They'll have to stop some of the subsidies that's part of the IMF program. But it won't go far enough. It won't go anywhere near, you know, what it needs to be. That will require a lot more than what typical politicians typically are willing to do, and certainly what the IMF pushes them to do. So it's going to be tough for them. All right. What did I want? All right, we have. Action Jackson is reminding me that on. When is this? This is on July 30th, the end of the month. We're going to have another front row event. Front row events are when a small group of people, less than 20, get together with me on Zoom to discuss a topic. It's very informal. You get to ask me any questions you want. It's very, very personal. We're doing that at 3 p.m. East Coast time on July 30th at the end of the month. It's a Saturday. And it costs $100 to participate, but a lot of you spend that on the Super Chat, and this gives you video interaction with me, which is, you know, can ask anything. The topic will be on individualism, and that'll be again on the 30th of July, so join us for that then. Colt, thank you for the support, really appreciate it. We're still $400 short of our target, so, you know, $400, that is $20 questions. So we're going to have to, somebody's going to have to step in here and help us out to get to our numbers this month. I'm not sure what's happening. Don't know what's happening, Catherine. It seems to be some, I don't know, summer doldrums in terms of you know, support for the show. All right, John, thank you. Really appreciate the support. Emmanuel says, I always learn so much. Thanks for continuing to do these. You're on. Thanks, Emmanuel. All right, let's now turn to the $20 questions. James says, what other countries do you see on the verge of being failed states? How important is food stability before a state collapses? The war in Ukraine is going to make some nations fight for food, I believe. What do you think? I don't think you're going to see any wars with regard to food, but certainly food prices are going up globally. And think about poor countries. The last time food prices spiked was it brought about the Arab Spring. If you remember the Arab Spring, I think that was 2009, primarily in the Middle East, started in Tunisia, spread to Egypt, and then all over the Middle East. It brought about ultimately the civil war in Syria. Basically, it brought people out into the streets and demonstrations and little revolutions in which people demanded food. Food is a huge issue. Food security is a huge issue. A lack of food is a huge issue. Poor people around the world, are going to have a hard time in Northern Africa, in the Middle East, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in parts of Asia. I mentioned Pakistan. Pakistan is the most dangerous of all these countries because Pakistan actually has nukes. So it's going to be interesting. Now, the other interesting part of this, which is relevant to Sri Lanka, but also relevant to the rest of the world, is that the China is a significant creditor to these countries. It has provided a lot of debt to these countries in terms of this, new Silk Road policy and trying to make the countries on the Silk Road dependent on China and linked to China. But what's going to happen to China when these countries are defaulting? What's going to happen to China when these countries can't pay their debt back? I mean, part of that is China will take assets in these countries, but I don't think China wants that. And the debts are too large. So, for example, right now it's supporting the Pakistani government. It's giving them more debt to try to support the Pakistani government. So it's, but how long can that survive? How long will China agree to do that? So there are real challenges for the Chinese government, real challenges for these other countries, real challenges for the West. Is this an opportunity for the West to undermine China's influence in these countries by the West coming in and assisting some of them? I wouldn't recommend that, but because I don't like foreign aid, but I think some Western countries will think this is the opportunity to do so. So those are the kind of issues that I can see coming up. And as I mentioned, also Latin America. I think parts of Latin America, particularly Central America, any country that has a lot of foreign debt, like Turkey has been in economic crisis for a long time, and partially it's because there's foreign debt. The foreign debt is usually denominated in dollars. How do they get dollars? Converting their local currency to dollars depreciates their local currency. So a massive challenge across the board. Massive challenge across the board. All right, let's see. There was another Sri Lanka. Free Trade says, I appreciate the Sri Lanka lecture. The Netherlands seem to be trying more or less the same thing, obviously based on environmentalism. A cancer on the world. Really is. I mean, think about if this is what happened when you went organic. Imagine what will happen when you go carbon zero. I mean, imagine what you happen when you stop using carbon fuels. Not just to make fertilizer, but everything. I mean, mass starvation, mass death, mass destruction. That's not an exaggeration. Hundreds of millions of people dying. Now, that won't happen. That's why they know that, so they're trying to do it gradually. And a lot of countries are just giving it lip service. They're not actually going through with it. But you can see here an example of what happens when a country goes through with an insanity like this. My assumption is the Netherlands is doing it slowly. But it's stupid on every front. If there's a real demand for organic food, for health reasons, let's say, if organic food is indeed better, then the market will dictate how much organic food there's out there. People demand it. Prices will go up. More land will be devoted to organic food. But to impose it is complete insanity and destructive to the environment, if there is such a thing. I don't like to use the term environment in this context, but it uses up more land, much more land, and ultimately, paper after paper after paper that I've seen show that organic farming, because it uses up more land and therefore more, and regular farming, ultimately in terms of CO2, are the same. All right, we are $330 short, so we'll see how we make up the difference. Questions is the best way to make up the difference. Do you have a question for me? Some of you must have questions for me, but given that it is already past 9 o'clock, only $20 above questions. We'll only do $20 above questions so we can get up the numbers, so we can get close to 650. And as I said, we're a little lagging this month because I did so few shows out of Okan and because those shows did not do well in the Super Chat because they didn't promote it and because Catherine wasn't there. I'll blame Catherine. What the hell? Gene asks about Sri Lanka. In the Sri Lanka video comment section, a lot of comments are hinting at how Americans should have done the same on January 6th. Will Sri Lanka embolden insurgencies around the world? Well, I don't think so, but really? I mean, Sri Lanka should have done the same thing on January 6th. Is the United States on the verge of collapse? Are people starving in the streets? No. January 6th, look, the bottom line is there was zero excuse for January 6th. Zero reason for it. The election was not stolen from Donald Trump. He lost. And this was an attempt by Donald Trump to overthrow a legitimate election. The U.S. is not about to collapse. The United States is not on the verge of hunger. It's just absurd to compare it. We are not ruled by a family, of dictators, basically, that just shift the chairs between them. And we haven't yet had a policy as stupid as going 100% organic farming. So, no, I mean, to compare this to January 6th is ridiculous. I don't think you're going to see a lot of insurgencies around the world. I mean, maybe in marginal countries, but I don't see any of the large countries of the world experiencing insurgencies. I don't see any of the big democracies of the world experiencing insurgencies. I can't think of where this would happen. Again, potentially in Arab Spring-like events, in Northern Africa, Middle East, maybe in Sub-Saharan Africa, maybe in other parts of Asia. Just nowhere substantial, in my view. And January 6th is completely unrelated. All right, let's see. Z400 Racer, thank you. Catherine says to our goal, let's all pitch in. She pitched in $5. Even Catherine, who's there promoting the Super Chat, has actually gone in and supported the show. So thank you, Catherine. I don't know what this means. Apollo Zeus for Elgato's winning streak. Elgato must be Catherine. Catherine is Elgato. I don't know how you got to be Elgato. But Apollo, thank you. So we got that. All right. Let's see. Any Sri Lanka? No. Okay. Stephen asks, what are your thoughts on Shinzo Abe, his politics and assassination? Yeah, so as you know, this weekend, Shinzo Abe, the former prime minister of Japan, was assassinated. He was, his political party is the party in power in Japan, just won an election in the Japanese upper house, which I think is more like the, anyway, one of the two houses of parliament in Japan. Shinzo Abe was prime minister until a few years ago. I think he served two terms, a period in which Japan is identified with two things, really, with the Abe reign, if you will, as prime minister. One was a aggressive foreign policy and an attempt to raise Japanese nationalist emotions and thoughts, an effort to increase the funding for the military, and really advocacy. Abe advocated for changing the Japanese constitution away from its current pacifist terms. So if I don't know if you know this, but the Japanese constitution was written for Japan by General MacArthur and his aide. It was based, at least to some extent, on the American Constitution, and it was basically crammed down the Japanese throats. The emperor was, I think, forced to sign it, but it was written by MacArthur, not by the Japanese. It is a constitution that basically commits Japan to pacifism. Given the rising threat from China, Japan is certainly considering revising that constitution. And Shinzo Abe was a major voice, pushing for that, for changing the constitution and eliminating the pacifism, and for significantly increasing the military budget for Japan and making Japan a much more significant military force in the Pacific. Something, by the way, I think the United States should support, given Japan's relative freedom. It's a free country, and strategic position vis-a-vis China. I think a stronger, more robust Japan, as long as it is free, would be very, very welcome, given the rise of China. Shinzo Abe, the second thing he was known for is his attempts to stimulate the Japanese economy. Basically, Japan has been in a state of stagnation since 1991, since the stock market and real estate collapse in Japan in the early 1990s. The economy has grown very little. Of course, the Japanese population is shrinking. Standard of living, quality of life, standard of living has gone down. Well, I wouldn't say gone down, but is lagging way behind Europe and the United States. GDP per capita is way behind. I mean, Japan is one of the largest economies in the world. I think it's the second or third, maybe the third largest economy in the world, behind the United States and China. Yet, on a per capita basis, it is way lagging behind much of Europe and the United States. It is not a rich country. People in Japan are not rich. And the only reason for that is government policies. It's because of the stagnation over the last, since the 90s, 30 years. Shinzo Abe tried to get Japan out of that with very minimal success, unfortunately, by basically, tried to stimulate the economy through government spending, and advocating for a central bank strategy that basically had negative interest rates. So tried to stimulate people borrowing money, starting businesses. Now, the solution to Japan's stagnation problem has been evident for the solution to the stagnation problem has been evident from the beginning. It's not difficult to solve the stagnation problem in Japan, even with a shrinking population. The solution is liberating the economy, primarily the banking sector, and even more importantly, the banking sector first and foremost. Maybe second to that is liberating the labor, employment sector. Shinzo Abe did some of that, a little bit of that, and the economy did respond a little bit, but nothing like it should. And Japan is still nowhere near its potential growth. I also think the other thing that needs to be liberated in Japan, so it needs to be deregulated. It needs to be the government needs to get out of managing the banks, and it needs to what did I say? Yes, labor. And then ultimately, finally, it needs to reduce its restraints on immigration. It needs to open up its borders. Now, the Japanese government are already doing some of that. So record numbers of foreign workers are right now in Japan, are being allowed in Japan. So there is a process, slow as it is, of liberalizing the Japanese immigration, but it's way too slow. There's a lot more that could be done. But I'd say much more important, even than immigration, is just getting rid of all the capital market constraints, the banking regulations, getting rid of the limitations on being able to fire people and hire people. So labor markets, labor markets and others, labor markets and banking deregulation is the most important thing that they could do right now in order to increase the economy. So Shinzo Abe was, I think, partially successful, but he's very much loved in Japan. He's considered one of its great prime ministers. It turns out he was murdered for just some bizarre reason with a homemade gun, because Japan is one of these countries that has very, very, very strict gun laws. Gun crime in Japan is unheard of. It just doesn't happen. So it's very unusual for somebody to get hit with to get killed using a gun. So crime generally in Japan is, if not the lowest in the world, one of the lowest in the world. It's unbelievable safe country. A number of things I found interesting in the assassination. One is this guy made a homemade gun and killed the prime minister. But the other is the response of the police. The head of the police department in whatever city this happened came out today and said it was his responsibility, he was at fault, and took complete responsibility for this because security was not tight enough around Shinzo Abe, who was giving a public speech at this part of the campaign with the elections this weekend. And so it was... So I liked the fact that they took responsibility. I mean, that's so unusual. I mean, think about the United States, where something goes wrong, everybody tries to make excuses, blame somebody else, deflect the responsibility. It's always somebody else's fault. Always somebody else's fault. Now, it's true that the Japanese are very good at this, and they often fall on the sword and kill themselves. Hopefully this police chief won't do that, because I don't think ultimately he's responsible. The guy who shot him is responsible. But there was a gap in security. GFR, whatever that is, thank you for the support. I really appreciate it. But I found that refreshing. Like in the US, it doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Where people actually say, I screwed up. All right, let's see. So thanks, Stephen, for that question. I was hoping somebody would ask about Shinzo Abe's assassination. All right. Oops. Let's see. Shazbat. Whoa. Shazbat says, he says that Catherine's enthusiasm is contagious. That's why we have her on, is to be enthusiastic and to be contagious. Please review the Prophet's Song by Queen. Wow. I don't know the Prophet's Song. I mean, I assume I know the Prophet's Song because I think I know all of Queen's songs, but I don't remember which one's the Prophet's Song. So thank you. He's giving $150. You know, I'm doing songs, and I've got a long list of songs now, plus I think one TV show, right? Yes. Also from Shazbat. But I've got a bunch of songs that I have to get to. But thank you, Shazbat. I will do that. That'll be fun because I like Queen. Queen is fun. So I'll do that and review it. Thanks, Shazbat. $150. That got us very close to where we need to go. We're just $50 short. So somebody maybe could do a $50 question, and we'll get that done. Get the 650 done with. I'll have to figure out why it's becoming more difficult to get to the 650. It requires more of my asking and Catherine's enthusiasm. All right. Shazvat also asks, who won the Okan poker tournament? I got knocked out pretty early. Oh, God. I can't remember his name. Now, you know I'm terrible with names. I can see his face. He's from Austin, Texas, and he won. Didn't get knocked out early, but I didn't make the final table, so I was pretty disappointed. I got knocked out. I had an ace queen with an ace on the flop. So and Garrett, thank you, Robert. Garrett won. So Garrett from Austin, Texas won the Okan Poker Tournament. He got a beautiful trophy. He didn't get a free attendance in next year's Okan. They didn't do that, which was what the prize was last time. Instead, he got a really pretty thing. Poker was fun. It was really, really fun. So I encourage you all to come play poker in Miami next year. I almost made it to final table. I got beaten. My ace queen was beaten by an ace king, which is pretty pathetic. Where I had all my chips in at the time. Garrett Garcia from Austin, Texas won. So it was pretty cool. It was a good game, a great final table. My table was good from the beginning. We had really good poker players. So it was the whole thing was just a blast. And I basically was haranguing everybody from the beginning. So I get pretty worked up in these things and have, it was a trophy. It was a trophy. Thomas, thank you, Thomas. Good to see you. It's good to see you at Okan. I heard Thomas's concert was really good. He did 2 concerts. One, a cello and piano, and one where he conducted an orchestra, a small orchestra, but a really talented orchestra. And really good performances, really amazing. He also did a course, his music courses. Scott Joplin was what he talked about. So I heard really good things about the course. I didn't manage to go, but the concerts were good. He says, enjoyed your Okan talk. At what point do you think U.S. entitlement spending gets to the point that we are in danger of default and serious banking collapse? It's so hard to tell. I mean, we're getting close because the baby boom generation basically over the next 7 years is going to entirely retire. The whole baby boom generation will be retired within the next 7 years or 6 years, something like that. And, when that happens, there'll be fewer people working for many, many people in retirement. And that means Social Security is in trouble. The Social Security is probably in okay shape. What's really in trouble is Medicare. Medicare is going to bankrupt this country. There's no way to pay it all. So I expect that within 10 to 20 years, basically Medicare will be in a position where we're spending so much on Medicare that we just can't afford it. And as a consequence of that, we are, we risk defaulting on our debt. So, if I had to put a timeline on it, I would say that we're probably looking at 10 to 20 years. Of course, I think I said that 10 years ago. So that's difficult to say. All right, MP Creates. These are $20 questions. Why is it so hard to be selfish? How can I unlearn altruism in my daily life and act more selfishly? What do you think of personality tests like Enneagram? And do you think different types are more susceptible to altruism? Look, selfishness is difficult only because you're trained to do two things, which you have to overcome. One is to be altruistic. It's to think about other people first, to feel bad when you do something with negative consequences for other people. Or more importantly, to feel bad when you do something that has positive consequences to you. To feel bad when you pursue your own pleasure, when your own success. To feel bad when you think, oh, I got the raise. Oh, I got a promotion. Oh, I finished this project. Oh, I'm so proud of myself. You're trained to think badly of yourself for all of those emotions and thoughts. And then on top of that, you're taught The morality is not about thinking, that morality is about feeling. So the primacy, you're taught the primacy of emotion. So they undermine you in epistemology by emphasizing emotion, and they undermine you in ethics by telling you that the good essentially is to be selfless. And that's ingrained in you by the culture, by your religion that you might have grown up with, by your parents, every part of your life. It's there, it's everywhere in the culture. It's, you know, to win a basketball game, the players have to be selfless. But what does that mean if they win? It's just filled with contradictions in the terminology and the words and how people relate and how people treat you and how people respond and how people talk. Everywhere, the culture has altruism. So you need to be really committed. And here's the thing. The thing you need to be committed to is rationality. The thing you need to be committed to is rationality and your life. Rationality as a means to your life. Rationality as a means to living. You have to be willing not to go on feelings. You have to be willing to act against your feelings, at least until your feelings catch up to your new values, to your new value system, to your new ideas. And that can take years. That is not easy. And the reason altruism is hard in daily life is because your emotions have not caught up. And your emotions will catch up the more you do, the more you think, the more you act, the more you achieve. And the more you fight them, the more you recognize the emotion, recognize the source as being altruism, reject it, continue on your path. And the more you do that, the more you identify values as selfish values, the more you will be able to get over that residue of altruism that primarily lives once you've philosophically adopted egoism, primarily lives in your emotion, primarily lives in the way these things are integrated, primarily lives in that sense in your subconscious. That you need to root out, and you root that out by constantly working, constantly identifying. This is what's important to me. These are my values. This is what I'm going to keep fighting for. In regard to personality tests, I just don't know that much about them. They say something about you. Does it mean you can't change? No. Are some more susceptible? Maybe personalities that are more second-handed or more collective or more social, however you want to define them, tend to also be more altruistic. And then, you know, when you, in order to defeat your altruism, maybe you have to change your personality to some extent. Are you capable of changing your personality? Absolutely. Up to a point. You can't change everything, but you can change a lot. So what this requires is focus, effort, constant reminder of your values, constant reminder of the purpose of your values, your own happiness, constant striving to those values, and constant understanding of where the emotions telling you to be altruistic are coming from. Don't repress them. Identify them, but reject them. Not in a sense of repressing them, in a sense of ignoring them. Continuing to act, feeling them, identifying where they come from, saying to yourself, no, this is inconsistent with my values. I'm not going to act on these emotions. These emotions need to change. So there's a difference between repressing and, in a sense, ignoring when it comes to action. The whole point of objectivism is you don't act based on emotions. And altruism is deeply embedded, in a sense, in your emotions. These are the value judgments you came to when you were a child, when you were growing up, when you had a different philosophy, implicitly. You have to change the value judgments. But changing those values judgment is going to take time. I'm actually going to have Jean Maroney on, who does a lot of work around these areas. And we'll talk about that. That'll be a great question for her MP Creates when she's on. Later this month on a Thursday. I'll have a date soon. Emmanuel says, I need some emotional fuel. Favorite movie you've seen this year? Oh, God. I don't retain that stuff. I know I've seen some good movies, but what have I seen recently? I mean, Top Gun is fun. Top Gun is fun. I'm watching this TV series. I think it's excellent. It's so well made. It's intriguing. It's suspenseful. It might turn out to be kind of ridiculous in the end. There's already some plot twists that are a little strange, but I really enjoyed it. It's really well made. It's very intense. It's called The Old Man. It's on FX. I watch it through Hulu. Really good stuff. Some of the best direction, some of the best atmosphere, and interesting. Keeps you. I can't wait for the next episode. Right? They come out a week apart, so they're not all out. You can't binge watch them. But the first 5 are really good. Hopefully, the next 5 are good as well. God, what's a good movie that I watched this year? Anybody think of a good movie that I talked about this year? Action Jackson says, all the old guys like Old Man. Funny. God. Yeah, The Old Man is filled with old men. It's really good, though. Haven't seen Dune. I'm sure Dune is beautifully made, but I don't know if it's inspiring. What would be an inspiring movie this year? I'll have to think about it. Ian says that The Old Man is based on a book. That makes sense. What's good about it is not just the story, which it would be from the book, the way it's made. It really is made well. Really engaging, really suspenseful, very atmospheric, weird like camera angles that are very effective in bringing out the emotion he wants to bring out. Emmanuel, I'll keep thinking about that. I'll have to make some other recommendations. Richard, thank you, Richard. Ricardo, Richie, pushing for the goal and keeping Catherine's streak alive. Thank you, Richard. Really appreciate that. And we've made the goal. We're at 683. You know, we could go to 750. We could go to 1,000, but I'll leave that up to the organic growth. I won't pester you too much about it. Bree asks, I'm not sure I understand why a profitable local business can't buy a foreign product when the government defaults. Aren't they using their own profits for the purchases? I don't understand it. I'm not trying to understand why a profitable local business can't buy foreign products when the government defaults. Aren't they using their own profits for the purchase? Yes, but the government is restricting their ability to buy it or taxing it. That's what tariffs are. So governments decide what can be imported into a country and what cannot, unfortunately. And you can try, but the government still controls the borders. It still controls the ports. And it determines what you can and cannot import. The same thing happens in the United States. One of the reasons we had a baby formula crisis in the United States, and I did a whole show on this, a baby formula crisis, is because the U.S. government did not allow businesses and individuals to import baby food from overseas, where there's plenty of supply. So that when a plant closed in the United States and suddenly the supply in the United States shrunk, you couldn't make up for it by importing from Europe because the government banned it because of the FDIC. And then what did Biden do to solve the problem? Send government planes overseas to bring baby formula. You didn't need the planes, President Biden. People were willing to buy it themselves. Just allow importation. It makes for better television. When you send planes, it looks like you're doing something. It looks like you're courageously solving a problem. All right, let's see. Let's see. All right. We have a couple of Sri-Lanka questions quickly. These are the below 20 questions. If you ask $20 questions now, you get priority. Dave asks, I was speaking to a random guy from Sri Lanka on Omegle. I don't know what Omegle is. And he told me he's actually a huge fan of your show and is moving to the U.S. as a law student. You're becoming a mini world celebrity. Yay. I've always had listening in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is one of the countries around the world where people have listened to my show for a long, long, long time. I have this global listenership to this show, has been for years. The 34,000 subscribers are not just Americans. I mean, maybe 60% Americans, the rest are global, or 55% Americans, the rest are global. So we have a real global following here. Let's see, there was another one. Another one was the other Sri Lanka question. DGOK, did they blame capitalism yet for the disaster in Sri Lanka? Sarcasm, of course. Sometimes you think that a 10-year kid would run a country better than geniuses who ban imported fertilizer on an island. Yeah, they haven't blamed capitalism as far as I know yet. Most of the commentary has actually been pretty good about, even the New York Times blamed the right things, like the living off of debt, the corruption, and the organic food. Even the New York Times got it. Hard to believe, but they did. Whoa! Frank is in the house. $50. Ooh. Asking these difficult questions. Frank says, what is the relationship between an idea and a concept? Well, an idea can be a concept or can be a proposition. It can be a thought. And in that case, is it constructed from several concepts? So an idea like objectivism, that's a concept that holds an entire philosophy, right? But an idea like, I don't know, the theory of relativity is an entire, it's many sentences, many concepts. It's built on concepts, right? So ideas are integrations of many concepts, right? An idea, a theory is an idea, philosophy is an idea. I think that's what you're getting at, Frank, right? So an idea is a abstract integration of many concepts that are related and relevant, right? The process is, and these are abstract concepts. They wouldn't be concrete concepts, right? These are abstract concepts. An idea is a combination of many abstract concepts, integration of many abstract concepts to represent an explanation of reality, some kind of explanation of reality. So whereas a concept relates to a particular, to one referent in reality, ideas relate to a whole explanation about reality. I could probably do better than that if I gave it some thought. So why don't we also save that question, Frank, for one of our philosopher friends when they come on the show? Like, I'm gonna copy paste this into and remember to ask one of our philosopher friends as well. They're not synonyms. Not every idea is just a concept. An idea can be a sentence. Every concept, and not every concept is an idea. Chair is not idea. So they're certainly not synonyms, right? John says, hey, everybody, don't forget to like the show. Like the show. Oh, we had way over 100 live listeners. Only 98 likes. So like the show. It helps with the algorithm. It really helps promote the show, get in front of more people. It's really great. Thank you, John. All right, back to the $5 to $10 questions. We've got a lot of those. So only, Ryan, thank you for the support. Really appreciate it. Only $20 or above questions from now on. Otherwise, I'm not going to get to sleep tonight. All right. Raphael asks, quick one, Yaron, why Alex Epstein only talks about energy? He would be pretty good at other topics. Thanks for the show. Because I finally convinced Alex that specialization is a good thing. Alex would be good at a lot of different things, but the way he gains credibility, the way he gets influence, and the way he becomes a deep thinker about a particular topic is by specializing. The way he becomes as good as he is by specializing, by knowing inside out. And you can see how better he's gotten over the years in explaining his position. If he, during those years, had been dabbling with 10 other topics, he wouldn't have had the time, the mental focus, the mental energy to concentrate on solving the issue, involved with energy. So I'm a big believer in focus, in specialization. I'm not a specialist. But that would be, I think, I think most people should be specialists. Not everybody, you need generalists, but most people should be specialists, and Alex has done phenomenal. What we need is many more Alexes. And yes, anything Alex does, he'll be good at. He's smart, he's dedicated, he's hardworking. One of the reasons he's so good at energy is also because it's a passion of his. He believes in it. And that's also a component of specialization. You have to really love what you're specializing in. Specialization is not for insects. I want, when somebody cuts me open and does surgery on me, I want him to be a specialist. James asked, do you think the future is Asia like Parangkana? I don't know who Parangkana is. Do you see another part of the world that has the capacity to advance technology and mindsets? I mean, any part of the world can advance technology and mindsets. I don't think it's unique to Asia or anywhere else. I do think that Asia, partially because just the size of the population in Asia, and the youthfulness outside of China, Japan, and South Korea, the youthfulness of the Asian population is really going to drive that continent for a while. It has moved towards more freedom, which is really good. So I do think Asia is going to play a crucial role, but I think any part of the world that embraces freedom can advance technology. All right. Whoops. Yeah. Is El Pluribus Unum a collectivist statement from the founding fathers? What's the exact translation? In the many, the one, right? In the many, the one. I think that's what it is. Right. Is that collectivist? No. I mean, the one in the many is what concept formation is all about. It's what integration is all about. The actual translation is out of many one. Well, that's what concept formation is. Out of many chairs, there's a chair. The one that, you know, the thing that, the concept that represents all of them. All integration is to find, you know, is to integrate. So, and a nation is from the many one. That is, from the many individuals, you have one nation. That doesn't mean the nation is more important than the ones. It just means that the ones, the individuals, created a nation. And that's true. That's special. And Ayn Rand has an essay about unity, unity in a country, the importance of unity in a particular country. And it's important that we're united, ideally around the ideas of the founding. So it's not collectivist. It's the idea of integration. It's the idea that we are creating one unit out of many, and that one unit will serve the many. That is, will serve the individuals. So I don't think they meant it that way. They meant it in the Constitution from the perspective. They meant in the Constitution from the perspective of individualism, not collectivism. James, how do you apply manifest destiny to your own life and mindset? I don't know what manifest destiny means. So no, I don't apply the idea of destiny at all. I don't think there is a destiny. I don't think America has a destiny. I don't think you as an individual have a destiny. Certainly not a manifest destiny. Manifest by whom? So I don't apply it to my life, my mindset. I don't think about destiny. I make a plan. I execute on a plan. I have values. I strive to attain those values. Michael asks, how would you compare the religious right's interaction with Trump compared to their interaction with Ronald Reagan? I mean, that's a complicated question. It deserves like a whole show. Just quickly, the religious right was new when Ronald Reagan became president. They were just establishing themselves. And what they did during the Reagan presidency was basically take control of much of the Republican Party and establish an agenda for the Republican Party. They didn't have that much influence on Ronald Reagan himself and on his policies and what he did, but they shaped the direction of the Republican Party in the future. And Ronald Reagan was something that generally the religious right in those days admired and respected. I think with Donald Trump, the religious right took a real turn. In a sense that Trump is the opposite of everything that they used to believe. You remember the religious right used to argue that during the Clinton administration, character matters, character matters, character matters, character matters. Clinton is a bad president because character matters. Well, they abandoned the character matters for power. The religious right basically pivoted away from character to power, to brute power. They basically accepted the fact that they are willing to cut a deal with the devil himself in order to sustain power, in order to get their way. And that's basically what has happened. God, look how many questions there are. Where did all these questions come from? We're going to go, I don't know, hours here. So I think, but by doing that, the religious right, basically exploited the fact that they'd already taken over the Republican Party by that point. Then what they did is basically abandon the principles around character and around so-called their moral code, their so-called moral code, and embraced power for power's sake, and replaced character with the worship of an individual, with personality worship. And they became adoring fans of Donald Trump no matter what he did. No matter how many commandments he violated, didn't matter. They loved him, and they still do. Some of them do. Some of them are backing away from him. Some of the evangelicals are backing away from him. All right, most of these questions are by Michael. All right, Michael, why did COVID lockdowns ever get lifted? Why didn't they keep us in permanent state of subjugation and tyranny? Well, because if we're subjugated constantly, we can't produce, we can't make stuff, the economy would collapse, we'd revolt against them. They can't maintain power with a population that is locked up. You have to give people a semblance of freedom and a semblance of progress. They don't rebel. Certainly you have to do that with Americans. You can't, if you lock Americans up for long periods of time, the standard of living collapses, quality of life, everything collapses, they will rebel. I mean, even in Sri-Lanka, they are rebelling. They certainly would in the United States. It just takes a lot to get there, and it's really, really painful. That's one reason. The other reason is, I know this is hard for you to believe, but the fact is that the American political class doesn't want. I mean, they're not that evil. They're not that malevolent. They're not trying to be dictators. For a variety of reasons, they're just not trying to be dictators. So it's not like they want to be dictatorial all the time. And no, they want a little bit more control and a little bit more control. And we end up in dictatorship not because somebody had a scheme to make us dictators, but because we gravitate towards that. And now, for example, that they know that they can get away with lockdowns next time, they'll push a little bit more and they'll push a little bit more, but you could only do so much at any given point in time. And the fact is, politicians only want to do so much at any given point in time. They're not, the thing that motivates politicians is not pure power lust. And they disguise the power lust that they have with caring. And they convince themselves that they do care. So they can't imagine themselves being dictators until they become dictators. Then they can imagine it. So psychology doesn't work as 0-1. There are all kinds of shades in between. Joseph asks, hi, Iran. Later this year, I'm traveling to Portugal, Lisbon, Porto, Coimbra, Tomar, and Albufeira. Can you recommend art museums and restaurants? What should I expect from the country generally and the people? I really enjoyed, what do you call it? Portugal. I particularly like Porto. It's a fun city. I would definitely do a lot of walking. It's very steep, but do a lot of walking, stairs. It's a fun, pretty, interesting city. Some really good restaurants. I don't have the restaurant names off the top of my tip, but there's a number of 2-star Michelin restaurants in Porto and not far from Porto that are excellent. I especially recommend renting a car and going out and driving through the wine country. The wine country is amazingly beautiful. So definitely do the wine country outside of Porto. Taste a lot of wine, but drive and out into the mountains and just drive. It's so beautiful. Lisbon is a really nice city, a lot to do, a lot to see. I don't have any particular museums to recommend. Again, I don't have my list of restaurants just here available for me like that, but there's a lot of good restaurants in Lisbon. You can just look them up and find them. And then between Porto and Lisbon is Coimbra. I think that's right. It's the oldest university maybe in Europe. Is that right? In the world maybe? One of the oldest. It's a really pretty town. I spend the night there. Really pretty. The old city is definitely worth walking through, the old cathedral. So definitely worth going to Coimbra. I don't know Tomar and Albufeira, so I can't comment. People are wonderful, friendly. In Lisbon, they speak English. They do in Porto as well. It's a poor country. You'll see that as you drive through. It's a poor country. It's one of the poorest, certainly in Western Europe, in Europe generally. It was a dictatorship, military dictatorship for many years, which I think caused the poverty. And it's had socialist governments. It might have a socialist government right now. But it's a great place to eat, good food, great place to drink, great wine, particularly, their red wine is fantastic. And it's a great, very friendly, very cheap place to live and to visit. So highly recommend Portugal. Great place. Whoops, I should have started. Okay. Ori asks, Fed is letting 90 billion of bonds per month mature. Who is paying? The Treasury? No, Treasury, what do you mean? Who's paying? Oh, the Treasury just issues new bonds, right? Because the Treasury needs the money. But the Treasury just issues new bonds. And the only thing that's happening is that the government, the Fed is not buying those bonds. Who's buying those bonds? The people who are buying the bonds are private investors, China, Japan. I don't think China's buying many bonds, but Japan, European countries. and private investors. So it can't be the Treasury, right? The Treasury can't buy bonds. Where does the Treasury get money? It would have to get money from the Fed, and the Fed is the one. So the bonds are basically being refinanced by the Treasury, but the buyer is not the Fed. Is that clear? I don't know if that's clear. The Fed has these bonds, right? It's got these bonds, and it pays interest on these bonds. And then at some point, it pays, right? It pays the principals, and the bond expires, right? So, I mean, it gets the principal. The Treasury pays the principal, yes. The Treasury, okay, I see what your question. Okay, the Treasury pays the Fed the principal. The Treasury gets that money by issuing other bonds. The Fed is not buying those other bonds. Typically, the Fed buys the bonds that are used to pay the principal. But the Fed is not now buying the bonds to pay the principal. Others are buying the bonds. So will the government take on more deficits to pay? Yes, of course. That's the only way it can pay. What about the private companies whose bonds got bought during QE? Those private companies are paying the Fed. So most of those were gone a long time ago. The ones that are remaining, almost all mortgage-backed securities, and those are just the Fed just gets paid by the companies as those bonds. I guess it would be those bonds get paid interest from the mortgages that underlying it, and ultimately those bonds are wound down as the mortgages all get wound down. So they're done in tranches, but that's too complicated. Basically, it's the private companies pay for it. Private companies pay for it. Right? And that's mainly mortgage-backed securities. So the mortgage-backed securities, they get, when the mortgage expires, the principal is, if the mortgage is paid early, then the mortgage-backed instrument gets the principal, and then it pays it out to whoever holds the mortgage-backed security ultimately. You're doing this finance stuff at 10 p.m. at night. Can the companies afford to pay this? Yes, again, it's mortgages. So it's mortgage-backed. Most of the private debt that the Fed holds is mortgage-backed securities. Those are all backed by homes, by mortgages, by individuals. It's not concentrated in one place. The only times that would get in trouble is if there was a collapse in the housing markets and people defaulted on their mortgages. And they will default, in this case, they would default to the Fed. So the Fed wouldn't be able to collect on those mortgages, on those bonds, equivalent of bonds, mortgages. Okay. Hopefully that made sense, Ori. Sorry, a little slow tonight. But yes, next time ask it earlier in the show. And if I had a whiteboard, I'd go over this on a whiteboard with you guys. But basically, the Treasury has to pay these, and they pay it by issuing bonds. And the Fed has to, is paid when these bonds mature. It's paid, and it's paid either by the Treasury or by private holders, whoever holds those bonds, whoever issued the bonds, by private issuers, not holders, issuers of the bonds. Okay, Michael, did the IDF ever explicitly target civilians during the initial wars for survival? Yeah, probably. I mean, there were civilians killed in different kind of massacres and places. In some cases, completely unjustifiably, but just in the passion of war, in the emotion of war. That happens. They should be condemned for it. It doesn't justify the attacks on Israel, and it doesn't justify Arabs doing the same thing to Jews, and it doesn't justify negating the existence of Israel. Catherine says, in-flight Wi-Fi fund. Thank you, Catherine. Appreciate. Oh, this is from Z400 Racer to Catherine. Thank you. Michael asks, are you concerned it might take 100 years to produce another 100 Alex Epsteins? No, I think it'll take a lot less than that. It's exponential. It starts out slow and then it goes exponentially. You get 1, then you get 2, then you get 4, then you get 8, then that's what I mean, right? It goes exponentially. Michael Sanders asks, would you go rock climbing for $1 million? No. I mean, there's no point in giving me money if the alternative is death. Michael, is impulsivity necessarily a vice? It depends on the context. Are you impulsive as a sports fan, or are you just impulsive generally? But impulsivity as a character trait is generally a vice, right? If you use it as a standard for action, if you act on it. Harper Campbell asked, what did you make of Adam Carolla's speech at TOSCON? I haven't heard Adam Carolla's speech at TOSCON. What did you think of Adam Carolla's? I take it you've heard it. What did you think of his speech? Since the 9th, 14th Amendment were effectively disregarded in the overturning of Roe, is the First Amendment at risk? I think all amendments at risk. I think certainly the 9th was disregarded. The 14th wasn't disregarded. It was just misinterpreted. I'm not sure about the 4th, but certainly the 9th primarily has been ignored by the Supreme Court for decades. The 9th is key to understanding the Constitution, but it's been ignored. And without the 9th, it's very difficult to protect rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution. You would have to reinterpret the 14th to get at that, but they're not willing to reinterpret the 14th. They've got a very, very rigid and very wrong interpretation of the 14th. Daniel asks, socialists are takers, not makers. That is true. Justin, why is emotional repression bad? Isn't it good for combating emotionalism? No. Emotional repression just creates psychological problems. It does nothing to combat emotionalism. Repression means I'm not feeling that. I'm not interested in feeling that. I don't want to acknowledge that feeling. That's emotional repression. And I think most Americans are repressed because they've been taught to repress all kinds of emotions, particularly boys are taught to repress emotions. No, partially to combat emotionalism, you want to feel the emotion, understand where it comes from, reject it, not the emotion itself, but reject its origin if its origin is irrational. But the emotion is an emotion. You shouldn't stop yourself from feeling it, from recognizing it, from identifying it. And only then can you reject it. After you've understood it. Only then, that's the healthy way in which to combat emotionalism. Daniel asks, have you thought about having a companion on the show? I mean, I had, for a few years, I had Amy would do a show with me periodically. I think once every 2 weeks we did a show together. Yeah, I mean, I would have a companion. I have to think about who it would be and how regular we could make it and so on. The challenge, I wouldn't want to do it every time because I like to talk. Of course, the other challenge is that, we've gone already 2 hours and 4 minutes, and it's just me. If we have somebody else, we're likely to go 3-4 hours. How are we going to limit it? We'll have to see. Okay, Daniel says, reason beaver. I'm not sure what that means. Justin asks, why is manosphere growing? I think it's growing. Manosphere is the sphere of men who reject women, or don't like women, who don't want a relationship with women, or whatever. And I think it's growing because people are losing touch with reality, with themselves. I think it's growing because men in particular are emotionally repressed, because I think because I think men are mostly repressed. I think they have no self-esteem. So the bottom line is lack of self-esteem. Nobody with self-esteem, no man with self-esteem would join the manosphere. A man with self-esteem is going to fight for his masculinity, is going to fight for a woman, wants a woman. I mean, assuming you're not homosexual, but, rejecting the female is not manly. It's not masculine. It's the negation of masculinity. And rejecting a woman and being an incel or joining, being dedicated to rejecting women is cowardice. And being afraid of women, a lot of people in the manosphere are so afraid of women. Oh, I don't want to marry her because then she'll divorce me and she'll take half my stuff. Well, don't marry somebody who you think will divorce you. Marry somebody who you really love and who loves you, and make sure she loves you, and have confidence that that is possible. So it's an issue of self-esteem, a lack of it. A lack of self-esteem, particularly with regard to your own masculinity. They might be able to conquer women. They might be able to sleep around. I talked about that. That is not self-esteem. That is an attempt to get fake self-esteem. Self-esteem is required to have a real relationship and have the confidence to be able to judge somebody who you can have a real relationship is not going to screw you. And yes, I know the legal system is against men and for women, and there are fewer and fewer good women. You know what? There are fewer and fewer good men as well. So, sexual marketplace. I know plenty of men who deal with women in today's marketplace in the same way as people have dealt with women for a long time. And, it takes self-esteem to want to date women who have a career. It takes self-esteem to want to date women who might earn more than you. It takes self-esteem to want to date women who have ideas, who have a backbone, who have a character, who have a personality, who don't look to you for everything, who are independent. But we live in a world where men don't have self-esteem. They long for the days where women were dependent on them, where women couldn't make a living, where women stayed home and took care of them. So my view is that men are pathetic today. Men are pathetic today. They're cowards, and they have no self-esteem, and they let women intimidate them. And that's why they hunker around together in the manosphere to bitch and complain. Right? All right. Just my opinion. Just an opinion of a guy who's been married a long time. All right. All right. We made it to $800. Thanks, guys. This is great. I appreciate it. It's been a 2-hour show, so it's a long show. All right. I will see you all on Tuesday. So the show will be on Tuesday, and then on Thursday, 8 p.m. I will talk to you all then. Bye, everybody.